Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. Out here, the highway is a ribbon of black silk thrown over the desert. Most nights, it's empty. But sometimes, you'll see a single headlight moving way too fast, cutting through the dark with no sound of an engine. The first time I saw it, I froze. My boss, a woman named Maria who's run this place for 40 years, she just calmly walked to the front door, opened it wide, and turned on the porch light. She looked at me and said, "You don't hide from it. You just have to let it see you so it knows it can keep on passing by." My name's Danny Valdez, and I've been working at Maria's Roadhouse for 8 months now. The place sits on Highway 170, about 20 miles east of Presidio, Texas, right where the desert starts to swallow everything whole. Maria bought this old converted gas station back in '84 and turned it into what locals call the last good meal before Mexico. The building's got that weathered adobe look, with a corrugated metal roof that pings like a steel drum when the wind picks up. I ended up here after my construction crew finished a job installing cell towers near Marfa. Most of the guys headed back to San Antonio, but I'd been having trouble at home. My ex-wife Linda kept calling, threatening to take my daughter Emma even further away than the Austin suburb where they'd moved. So when Maria mentioned she needed help with the dinner rush and overnight shifts, staying put seemed like the smart play. The tavern's got character, I'll give it that. The main dining room has 6 booths with cramped red vinyl seats, a bar with 8 stools, and walls covered in old license plates from every state. There's a jukebox in the corner, a real Wurlitzer from the '70s, that Maria keeps stocked with classic country and conjunto music. The kitchen's separated by a pass-through window where you can watch Maria work her magic with migas, chicken fried steak, and the best breakfast tacos this side of the Rio Grande. We get truckers mostly, folks heading to or from the border crossing at Presidio. Some Border Patrol agents stop by during shift changes. Occasionally, tourists driving the river road will pull in, looking half dead from the heat and grateful for our industrial-strength air conditioning unit that sounds like a freight train but keeps the place cool enough to function. Maria's got graying hair she keeps in a tight bun, weathered hands that move like lightning when she's cooking, and eyes that seem to catch everything. She's lived in this area her whole life, speaks Spanish and English with equal fluency, and knows every local family going back 3 generations. When she hired me, she said I reminded her of her son Miguel, who died in Iraq back in 2007. The first few weeks were normal enough. I learned the routine. Prep work in the afternoons, dinner service from 5 to 10, then keeping the place open for late-night travelers until sunrise. Maria showed me how to operate the old cash register, where she keeps the spare propane tanks for the grill, and how to reset the circuit breakers when the ancient electrical system gets overwhelmed. But it was that night with the headlight that everything changed. That was 3 weeks into the job. Maria had just finished serving dinner to a family of 4, tourists from Dallas who'd gotten turned around trying to find the hot springs at Big Bend. Their kids kept staring at the mounted deer head above the bar, whispering about whether its glass eyes moved when they weren't looking. I was wiping down tables when the headlight appeared, maybe half a mile out on the highway. At first, I thought it was a motorcycle, but as it got closer, something felt wrong. The light was too bright, too steady, and there was no rumble of an engine echoing across the desert silence. "Maria," I called out, pointing toward the window. She glanced up from counting the register, saw what I was looking at, and immediately set her money aside. Without saying a word, she walked to the front door, flipped the porch light switch, and stepped outside. The light was approaching fast now, maybe 50 yards away. "Danny, come here," she said, her voice calm but firm. I joined her on the covered porch. The headlight was moving in a straight line down the center of the highway, not wavering left or right like a normal vehicle would. As it passed directly in front of the tavern, I felt heat against my face, not from the summer air, but from whatever was producing that light. The tourist family pressed their faces to the window, pointing and taking pictures with their phones, but their cameras just showed darkness. After the light disappeared over a rise in the road, Maria turned to me. "Time you learned some things about working here." We went back inside. The Dallas family was complaining that their phones had stopped working, that all their photos from dinner had somehow been corrupted. Maria comped their meal and sent them on their way with a full tank of gas and directions to the interstate. Once they left, she locked the front door and flipped the closed sign, even though it was only 9:30. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the booth nearest the kitchen. I slid into the cracked vinyl seat while she poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she kept going all night. The coffee here was strong enough to wake the dead, a blend she ordered special from a roastery in El Paso. My grandmother opened a restaurant in this exact spot back in 1952, Maria began, settling across from me. Just a little cafe with 4 tables and a griddle. This highway was different then. Busier, more people driving between the border towns. But even then, there were visitors. She reached under the register and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. When she unfolded it, I saw a list written in careful cursive, some lines in English, others in Spanish. These are the rules my grandmother wrote down. Her mother told them to her, and her grandmother before that. They've been updated over the years, but the core ones never change. I leaned forward to read the paper, but Maria held up her hand. "First, you need to understand why they exist. This stretch of highway sits on old ground. Comanche hunting trails, Spanish colonial routes, smuggler paths from the Revolution. Lots of people have died here over the centuries. Some of them, they haven't moved on." The jukebox clicked and whirred, changing records on its own. Patsy Cline started singing Crazy, her voice floating through the empty dining room. "That headlight you saw tonight? That's Joaquin Morales. He was running drugs up from Ojinaga back in 1987, riding a Harley-Davidson with a single headlight. Border Patrol chased him for 60 miles before he crashed into an arroyo about 5 miles east of here. Bike exploded, burned him alive." Maria sipped her coffee, watching my reaction. "Now he rides that same route every few weeks, looking for the men who killed him. The porch light lets him see that we're not them. If you hide, if you turn off the lights and try to wait him out, he'll assume you're guilty of something." I stared at the rules on the paper, trying to process what she was telling me. "You're saying that was a ghost?" "I'm saying this place sits between worlds, Danny. Always has. And if you want to keep working here, you need to follow these rules exactly. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no thinking you know better." She slid the paper across the table. "Read them tonight. Tomorrow, I'll start teaching you what each one means." I picked up the list, feeling the weight of decades in the creased paper. The first rule was written in faded blue ink. Always acknowledge the rider, never hide from his light. Outside, a coyote howled somewhere in the distance, its call echoing off the rocky hills that surrounded us like ancient guardians. I spent that night reading Maria's rules by the light of the old desk lamp in the back office. The paper felt fragile in my hands, like it might crumble if I wasn't careful. Some rules were straightforward. Never serve anyone who pays with silver coins. Others were cryptic. If the jukebox plays La Llorona 3 times in a row, close the kitchen immediately. The next evening, Maria started my real education. "Rule number 2, she said, pointing to the list as we prepped for dinner service. Never serve anyone who pays with silver coins. You know why? I shook my head, slicing onions for the evening's batch of salsa verde. Because silver coins means they're paying with Spanish colonial money. Reales, pieces of 8, that sort of thing. And anyone paying with coins that old has been dead longer than this building's been standing. She opened the register and showed me a small wooden box tucked beneath the cash drawer. Inside were maybe 20 silver coins, tarnished black with age. Every few years, someone comes in and tries to pay with these. You take the order, serve the food, accept the payment, and put the coins in this box. But you never, and I mean never, give them change. Dead folks don't need change, and if you try to shortchange death itself, it takes exception. The dinner rush was light that night. A couple of Border Patrol agents stopped by for coffee and pie, talking quietly about strange tracks they'd found near the river. Human footprints that just stopped in the middle of a stretch of sand, like someone had simply vanished mid-step. Around 9:15, a trucker named Hector pulled up in his 18-wheeler, hauling a load of furniture from a factory in Juarez. He was a regular, always ordered the same thing: carne guisada, beans, rice, and a tecate. Maria liked him because he tipped well and never caused trouble. But tonight, something was different about Hector. His usual smile was missing, and his hands shook when he reached for his wallet. "You okay, hermano?" Maria asked as she set his plate down. "Had a weird drive up from the crossing," he said, cutting his meat with more force than necessary. "Kept seeing things in my mirrors that weren't there when I looked over my shoulder. And about 10 miles back, I swear I heard my mother calling my name." Maria's expression grew serious. "Your mother been dead long?" 6 years next month." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a small bundle of dried herbs tied with red thread. "Hang this from your rearview mirror. Don't take it down until you get to wherever you're going." Hector accepted the bundle without question. Around here, you learned not to argue with remedies that had kept people alive for generations. After he left, Maria turned to me. "That's rule number 4. Help the living ward off the dead. Sometimes this place attracts things that shouldn't be walking around. When that happens, we help however we can." The jukebox kicked on by itself, cycling through Johnny Cash, Freddie Fender, and then settling on a song I didn't recognize. Something in Spanish with a woman's voice that sounded like wind through broken glass. "Is that?" I started to ask. "La Llorona," Maria confirmed, "but just once, so we're fine. If it plays 3 times in a row, that means she's close, and we shut down the kitchen until sunrise." She began cleaning the grill, scraping away the grease and char from the day's cooking. "My grandmother saw her once, back in the 60s. Said she was standing in the parking lot at 3 in the morning, looking through the windows at the customers inside. Soaking wet hair, white dress, the whole deal." "What did your grandmother do?" "Turned off all the lights except the one over the register, locked the doors, and made everyone stay put until dawn. La Llorona doesn't like bright lights, but she'll wait all night if she thinks there's something inside worth taking." The song ended, and the jukebox went quiet. Outside, the night was so still, I could hear my own heartbeat. At 10:30, our last customer of the evening walked in, a woman I'd never seen before. She was maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and clothes that looked expensive but practical. She chose the booth closest to the door and ordered black coffee and a slice of Maria's coconut cake. When I brought her order, she handed me exact change. 3 silver coins that looked older than anything I'd ever seen. My hands started sweating as I remembered rule number 2. I took the coins to Maria, who examined them briefly before nodding and placing them in the wooden box. "Everything okay with her order?" I asked quietly. "She's not causing trouble," Maria replied. "Just passing through." I glanced back at the woman. She was eating her cake slowly, methodically, like she had all the time in the world. When she finished, she stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the door. But instead of going outside, she just faded, like smoke dissipating in still air. The booth where she'd been sitting was empty, the plate and coffee cup gone as if they'd never existed. "Maria," I said, my voice coming out as a whisper. "I saw it," she replied calmly. "That's why we have the rules, Danny. Some customers aren't quite alive, but they're not dangerous either. They just need a place to rest for a moment before moving on." She handed me a damp cloth and pointed to the booth. "Clean that table good. Sometimes they leave things behind. Memories, mostly. You don't want to touch those accidentally." As I wiped down the vinyl seat, my fingers tingled with cold, and for just a second, I heard children laughing, the sound coming from somewhere far away and long ago. "Good," Maria said when I finished. "You're learning. Rule number 3, respect all customers, living and dead. They all pay their debts one way or another." The rest of the shift passed quietly. Maria showed me how to prepare the tavern for overnight customers, truckers who needed a place to rest, lost travelers, and occasionally things that were harder to categorize. "Tomorrow night, I'll teach you about the mirrors," she said as we locked up at dawn. "And Danny? Start carrying this." She handed me a small silver cross on a thin chain, not fancy, just plain metal that felt warm despite the morning chill. "Belonged to my son," she said. "It won't stop everything, but it'll help." As I drove home to my little rental trailer on the outskirts of Presidio, I kept thinking about the woman who'd paid with silver coins. Something about her face had seemed familiar, though I was certain I'd never seen her before. It wasn't until I was falling asleep that I realized why. She'd looked exactly like the woman in the faded photograph that hung behind the tavern's register. Maria's grandmother, who'd opened the first restaurant on this spot 70 years ago. The next night, Maria kept her promise about the mirrors. Before we opened for dinner service, she led me to the back hallway where the restrooms were located. I'd walked past this area dozens of times, but never really paid attention to the details. "Look at the mirrors," she said, pointing to the one hanging above the sink in the men's room. At first glance, it seemed normal. Just an old, silvered glass in a wooden frame. But as I studied it more closely, I noticed something strange. The reflection showed the bathroom accurately, but there was always a shadow in the corner that didn't match anything in the actual room. "Every mirror in this place is the same," Maria explained. "They show things that aren't quite there yet, or things that have already happened. Rule number 5, never trust what you see in the mirrors after midnight." She walked me through the tavern, pointing out each reflective surface. The mirror behind the bar, the one in the ladies' room, even the polished chrome on the coffee machine. All of them showed subtle discrepancies. A figure standing where no one stood, empty spaces where people should be. "Why keep them?" I asked. "Because they're useful warnings. You see someone in the mirror who isn't actually in the room, that means they're coming. You see an empty space where a customer is sitting, that means they're already gone, and you're looking at an echo." The dinner rush started early that evening. A group of geology students from Sul Ross State University stopped by, heading back from a research trip near Santa Elena Canyon. They were excited, talking about rock formations and fossil deposits, completely unaware that one of them, a young man with a Sul Ross baseball cap, cast no reflection in the mirror behind their booth. I caught Maria's eye and nodded toward the mirror. She glanced over, saw what I was seeing, and gave me a subtle shake of her head. We served them normally, but I noticed she made sure to give the young man extra salsa and a larger portion of rice. "Fuel for the journey," she whispered to me as we passed in the kitchen. After the students left, Maria explained, "Sometimes people are already dying and don't know it yet. Car accidents, heart attacks, things like that. The mirrors show us their true state. We can't change what's coming, but we can make sure they have a good last meal." Around 8:30, a familiar pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Joe Sandoval climbed out, moving slower than usual. Joe owned a small ranch about 15 miles south, where he raised cattle and horses for the Border Patrol's mounted unit. He'd been coming to the tavern since Maria first opened, and she always lit up when she saw him. Tonight was different. Joe looked exhausted, and when he sat at his usual spot at the bar, I could see dark circles under his eyes. "Rough week?" Maria asked, already preparing his usual, grilled chicken breast with pinto beans and corn tortillas. "Strange week," Joe replied. "Lost 3 head of cattle. Found them this morning in the south pasture, but Danny, they were just empty, like something had drained all the blood right out of them." Maria set his plate down and poured him a beer. "Any tracks?" "That's the weird part. No coyote prints, no cat signs. Just these holes in the ground perfectly round, about the size of a coffee can. And the holes went down deep. I dropped a rock in one and never heard it hit bottom." I was refilling the ice bucket, but I stopped to listen. This sounded like something that might relate to the rules. "How many holes?" Maria asked. 7, all in a straight line pointing toward the highway. Maria's expression hardened. "Joe, I need you to listen to me carefully. Don't go back to that pasture for at least a week. Keep your horses in the barn at night, and if you hear digging sounds after dark, don't investigate." She went to the register and pulled out a small bag of coarse salt. Not the regular table salt we used for cooking, but something that looked like rock salt mixed with herbs. "Sprinkle this around your house and barn, all the way around, no gaps. And if you see any more holes appearing, you call me immediately." Joe accepted the salt without question. Around here, when Maria Delgado gave you advice about protecting your livestock, you followed it. After he left, I asked her about the holes. "Rule number 6, she said, showing me the list again. 7 holes in a line means the harvest moon brings hunger. There's something that lives deep underground, older than the Comanche, older than the Spanish. Most years it stays asleep, but every few decades, when the moon is right, it sends out feeders." She pointed to a calendar on the wall. I'd been so focused on learning the day-to-day routine that I hadn't noticed we were approaching a full moon. 3 more days, she said. It'll try to feed on whatever it can find. Cattle, deer, sometimes people who wander too far from the lights. The holes are how it drains the life out of things. The jukebox started playing again, this time settling on an old conjunto tune by Esteban Steve Jordan. The accordion melody filled the dining room, cheerful and bright, a stark contrast to what we were discussing. "How do you know all this?" I asked. My grandmother kept journals. Everything that happened here, everything she learned from the people who came before. I've been adding to them for 40 years. She gestured toward the back office. 3 filing cabinets full of notes, drawings, dates when things happened, patterns. A new customer walked in. A woman in her 60s wearing a faded denim jacket and cowboy boots that had seen better decades. She moved with the careful gait of someone whose knees had given her trouble for years. "Evening, Elena," Maria called out. Elena Moreno owned a small store in Redford, about 30 miles downriver. She sold groceries, propane, and hunting licenses to the scattered ranching families in the area. Tonight, she looked worried. "Maria, I need to talk to you," Elena said, settling into a booth near the back. I brought her coffee and listened while she explained that several of her customers had reported strange dreams. Always the same dream. They were standing in their yards at night, looking down at holes in the ground, and feeling an overwhelming urge to lie down and put their faces close to the openings. 3 different families, all had the same dream, Elena said, and they all live within 10 miles of Joe Sandoval's place. Maria nodded grimly. It's starting early this time. Usually we have more warning. She went to the office and returned with a worn notebook and a pen. I need names and addresses of everyone who's had the dream. We'll need to get salt to all of them before tomorrow night. While Maria and Elena worked on their list, I noticed something in the mirror behind the bar. My own reflection was there, but standing behind me was a figure I didn't recognize. A tall man in old-fashioned clothes, pointing toward the front door. I turned around, but no one was there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. "Maria," I said quietly. She looked up from her notes, followed my gaze to the mirror, and frowned. "What did you see?" A man pointing at the door, dressed like someone from a long time ago. "Describe him." Tall, maybe 6'3", dark hair, mustache, wearing a vest and a white shirt, silver buttons on the vest. Elena and Maria exchanged glances. "That's Samuel Morrison," Elena said. "He owned a trading post here in the 1890s. Only shows up when something big is coming." Maria closed her notebook and stood up. "Elena, we need to move faster than I thought. Can you start making calls tonight?" "Already planned on it." They discussed distribution routes for the salt, which families lived closest to the holes, and who had vehicles that could handle the rough ranch roads. I watched them work, these 2 women who'd spent their lives protecting a community that probably never knew how much danger it was really in. Around 11, Elena left to begin her rounds. The tavern was empty except for us, but I kept checking the mirrors. Samuel Morrison didn't appear again, but the shadows in the corners seemed darker than usual, and twice I thought I heard scratching sounds coming from beneath the floor. "Tomorrow we close early," Maria said as we finished cleaning up. "And tomorrow night, you learn about rule number 7. She handed me an extra bag of the herb mixed salt. "For your trailer, all the way around, like I told Joe." As I drove home, I kept thinking about the holes Joe had described. 7 perfect circles, pointing toward the highway like some kind of arrow. In my rearview mirror, the tavern's lights grew smaller, but they never quite disappeared, even after I had driven far enough that they should have been hidden by the hills. When I reached my trailer, I got out and walked the perimeter, sprinkling Maria's salt in a continuous line around the foundation. The crystals caught the moonlight, creating a barrier that somehow felt solid despite being nothing more than seasoning and dried plants. Inside, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of holes in the ground and the sound of something large moving through tunnels deep beneath the desert. The next day, Maria closed the tavern at 6 instead of our usual 10. She'd spent the afternoon on the phone with Elena and several other locals, coordinating the salt distribution. When the last customer left, she locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. "Time you learned about rule number 7, she said, pulling out a set of keys I'd never seen before. "And rule number 8. She led me to a door behind the kitchen that I'd assumed was just another storage closet. The key turned with a heavy click, and when she opened it, I saw stairs leading down into darkness. "My grandfather dug this cellar in 1954, Maria explained, flicking on a light switch. "Not for storing food or wine, for hiding." The basement was larger than I'd expected, maybe 20 by 30 feet, with stone walls and a concrete floor. Along one wall, Wooden shelves held mason jars filled with various herbs, salts, and liquids I couldn't identify. The opposite wall was covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn maps dating back decades. Rule number 7. When the harvest moon rises, stay below ground until dawn, Maria said, pointing to a large calendar on the wall. Rule number 8. Trust the photographs, not your memory. She walked me over to the collection of images. Most were black and white, showing the tavern and surrounding area at different periods. But scattered among them were photos that made my skin crawl. Pictures of things that shouldn't exist. One showed the highway at night, but instead of asphalt, the road appeared to be made of something that writhed and moved. Another captured what looked like the tavern's dining room, except every customer had hollow eye sockets and their mouths were open too wide. The cameras see what's really there, Maria explained. Your mind tries to protect you by showing you what it thinks you can handle, but during certain times, like tomorrow night, the protective barriers get thin. She pulled out a Polaroid camera from the 1980s. This belonged to my son, Miguel. He was interested in photography before he enlisted. Started documenting the strange things that happened here. She handed me a photo labeled October 15th, 2003, Harvest Moon. It showed the parking lot outside the tavern, but instead of gravel and dirt, the ground was covered with round holes, each one perfectly smooth and black as crude oil. Standing between the holes were figures in old-fashioned clothes, men and women who looked like they'd stepped out of the daguerreotypes from the 1800s. Every harvest moon, they come back, Maria said. The people who died here over the centuries. They're drawn by the same force that creates the holes. Most of them are harmless, just confused spirits looking for something familiar. But some... She showed me another photo. In this one, a tall figure in a black coat stood near the tavern's front door. Where his face should have been was just smooth skin, no features at all. The collector, she said quietly. He shows up every few years. Takes people who get too close to the holes. We don't know where he takes them, but they're never seen again. A chill ran through the basement despite the warmth outside. How do you know all this works? The salt, the hiding? Because I've been doing it for 40 years, and I'm still alive. She gestured to the photographs. My grandmother, my mother and me. 3 generations of women who've kept this place running and this community safe. She led me to a corner where several camping cots were set up with blankets and pillows. Tomorrow night, we sleep down here. Anyone who wants our protection can join us. The stone walls and the blessing my grandmother put on this place keep the collector out. Blessing? Maria pointed to symbols carved into the stone, a mixture of Spanish colonial religious imagery and what looked like indigenous pictographs. My grandmother married a Comanche man in 1955. His grandfather taught her the old ways of warding off the things that hunt in darkness. We went back upstairs, and Maria showed me how to prepare the tavern for what she called Harvest Night. All the mirrors had to be covered with white cloth. The jukebox had to be unplugged. Most importantly, every light in the building except the ones in the basement had to be turned off. Light attracts the collector, she explained, but darkness makes the holes hungry. It's a balance. As we worked, she told me about previous harvest moons. In 1987, a group of college students had ignored the warnings and camped near the river. Only 2 were found the next morning, and they had no memory of what happened to their friends. In 1999, a trucker had stopped for coffee despite Maria's attempts to turn him away. His rig was found abandoned 3 miles down the highway. Engine still running, but he was gone. The thing underground, it's not evil exactly, Maria said as we covered the last mirror. It's just hungry, like a bear waking up from hibernation. But the collector, he's different. He chooses his victims. Around sunset, Alima arrived with her pickup truck loaded with supplies. More salt, bottled water, sandwiches, and a thermos of coffee, strong enough to keep us alert all night. Behind her came Joe Sandoval and his wife Carmen, followed by the Ramirez family from a ranch near Candelaria. "Any more holes?" Maria asked Joe. 14 now, he replied grimly. "And they're getting bigger. I could fit a 50-gallon drum in the newest one." Maria nodded and ushered everyone inside. She explained the rules to the newcomers while I helped carry sleeping bags and blankets down to the basement. The space felt crowded with 8 adults and 3 children, but no one complained. As full darkness settled over the desert, Maria turned off the main lights. We gathered in the basement, and she distributed Polaroid cameras to everyone. "If you see something that doesn't look right, take a picture," she instructed. "Don't trust what your eyes tell you. Trust the camera." Around midnight, we heard the first sounds, a low humming that seemed to come from the ground itself. The children huddled closer to their parents, while the adults took turns checking the photos they'd snapped of empty corners and doorways. Mrs. Ramirez handed me her camera. The photo she'd just taken showed the basement stairs, but in the image, someone was standing at the top. A woman in a white dress with long dark hair covering her face. "There's no one there," I whispered, looking at the actual stairs. "There is," Maria said, examining the photo. "That's Isabella Vega. She died in a car accident on the highway in 1962. She always comes back during harvest moons, looking for her children." The humming grew louder, accompanied by scratching sounds from above. Something was moving around upstairs, but it didn't sound like footsteps, more like something being dragged across the floor. Elena took another photo, this one aimed at the ceiling. When it developed, we could see shapes moving in the darkness above us, long, thin forms that twisted and coiled like snakes. "Feeding tubes," Maria explained quietly. "The thing underground sends them up through the holes to search for life force." Joe's son, maybe 10 years old, tugged on his father's shirt. "Papa," something scratching at the door. We all looked toward the basement entrance. The scratching sound was rhythmic, patient, like fingernails on wood. Maria motioned for everyone to stay quiet and took a photo of the door. The developed image showed a tall figure in a black coat standing just outside, his featureless face turned toward the camera. Behind him, the feeding tubes writhed through the air like seeking tentacles. The collector had found us. "How long until dawn?" Carmen whispered. Maria checked her watch. 4 hours. The scratching continued, sometimes stopping for long minutes before starting again. Each time someone took a photo of the door, the collector was there, waiting with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. Around 3 a.m., young Tommy Ramirez fell asleep despite the sounds above. His mother tried to wake him gently, but he wouldn't respond. When Elena took a photo of the sleeping boy, we saw something that made everyone's heart stop. In the image, thin black tendrils extended from the ceiling, reaching toward Tommy like grasping fingers. The feeding tubes had found a way through the blessing's protection. Maria moved faster than I'd ever seen her. She grabbed a mason jar from the shelf, something filled with what looked like crushed glass mixed with ash, and sprinkled it in a circle around Tommy's sleeping form. The tendrils in the photograph recoiled, writhing away from the boy like they'd been burned. "What is that?" Carmen whispered, clutching her son closer. "Ground blessed bones and sage ash," Maria replied, checking her jar's remaining contents. "My grandmother's emergency reserve, but I don't have enough to protect all of us if more tubes break through." Joe was studying his own photograph of the ceiling. "Maria, look at this." In his image, the feeding tubes weren't just randomly searching. They were following specific patterns, converging on areas where people were breathing heavily or where hearts were beating fastest. They could sense life force even through the protective barriers. "Everyone needs to slow their breathing," Maria instructed. "Deep, slow breaths. Make yourselves as calm as possible." Elena took another picture of the basement corners. The developed photos showed Isabella Vega again, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in a Border Patrol uniform stood beside her, his face a mask of confusion. Behind them, more figures gathered, dozens of people in clothing from different eras. "The harvest moon is pulling them all back," Maria said grimly. "Everyone who died on this stretch of highway over the past century." The scratching at the door had stopped, but that somehow felt worse than when it was happening. In the silence, we could hear new sounds, footsteps walking around upstairs, multiple sets moving in different directions. Young Sofia Ramirez, maybe 8 years old, pointed toward the far corner of the basement. "Abuela, who is that lady?" We all turned to look. In the corner stood an elderly woman in a faded blue dress, her gray hair pinned back in an old-fashioned style. She was smiling gently and beckoning to Sofia. "Don't look at her," Maria said quickly, positioning herself between Sofia and the apparition. "She's not your grandmother." But when Elena snapped the photo of the corner, it showed only empty space. "Some spirits can appear directly to living eyes during harvest moons," Maria explained, "but they're not really here. They're echoes, trying to lure the living into following them." Carmen kept taking pictures of her sleeping son. In each photo, the protective circle around Tommy was holding, but barely. The blessed bones and ash were starting to lose their potency. The circle was becoming thinner with each image. "How much longer?" Joe asked, checking his watch. 3 hours until dawn," Maria replied. "But I don't think we're going to make it with just hiding." She walked to another shelf and pulled down a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. "My grandmother wrote about a time when the collector got inside the barriers. 1943, during the war. 3 people were taken that night." She flipped through the pages, searching for something specific. But she also wrote about rule number 9, the one we only use when everything else fails. "What's rule number 9?" I asked. Maria found the page she was looking for. The writing was in Spanish, but she translated as she read. "When the collector comes calling, offer him a trade, 1 memory for 1 life." "What does that mean?" "The collector doesn't just take people," she explained. "He takes their memories, their experiences, everything that makes them who they are. But he can be bargained with. You can offer him a memory in exchange for letting someone go." Elena studied the journal page. "What kind of memory?" "Something important. Something that defines who you are. The more significant the memory, the more valuable it is to him." Above us, the footsteps had stopped. In the sudden quiet, we heard a new sound, voices calling out names. I recognized one of them immediately. "Danny!" the voice called. "Danny, where are you?" It was my ex-wife Linda's voice coming from somewhere upstairs. "Danny, Emma needs you. She's hurt." My daughter's name hit me like a physical blow. Emma was safe in Austin, hundreds of miles away. But hearing her name in this place made my hands shake. "It's not her," Maria said firmly. "The collector uses the voices of people you care about." But the voice continued calling, becoming more desperate. "Please, Danny. She's bleeding. I can't stop the bleeding." Carmen gasped and pointed to the stairs. In the photograph she'd just taken, a small figure stood halfway down, a little girl in a school uniform, her face pale and streaked with what looked like blood. "That's not Emma," I told myself, but my feet were already moving toward the stairs. Joe grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to it." "Danny." The voice was closer now, right at the basement door. "She's dying. You have to help her." I pulled away from Joe and started climbing the stairs. Behind me, Maria was shouting something about the rules, but all I could think about was Emma needing help. I reached the door and put my hand on the knob. Through the wood, I could hear Linda sobbing. "Please, Danny. She's asking for you." The door opened before I could turn the handle. Standing in the tavern's kitchen was the collector, his black coat hanging loose on his tall frame. Where his face should have been was smooth skin, like someone had erased his features with an eraser. But behind him, I could see Linda holding Emma, blood on her hands, both of them looking at me with desperate eyes. "Help us," Linda whispered. I stepped forward, knowing it was wrong but unable to stop myself. The collector raised one pale hand, and I felt something cold touch my forehead. Then Maria was there, grabbing my shoulder and pulling me back. "Danny, look at them through the camera." She shoved Elena's Polaroid into my hands. With shaking fingers, I lifted it and took a picture of Linda and Emma. The flash went off. The photo developed. It showed the kitchen empty except for the collector, his featureless face turned toward the camera. No Linda. No Emma. Just shadows and lies. The false images vanished like smoke, but the collector remained. He took a step toward us, and I felt that cold touch again, this time reaching deeper into my mind. "The memory trade," Maria said urgently. "It's the only way." "What memory?" I asked, backing toward the basement stairs. "Something precious, something that defines who you are." The collector was getting closer. Behind his smooth face, I could sense hunger, not for food, but for the experiences that made people human. I thought about Emma, about the day she was born, and how perfect she'd looked in my arms. I thought about Linda and our wedding day, before everything went wrong. I thought about my father teaching me to fix cars in his garage in San Antonio, but then I thought about something else. My first night working at the tavern, when Maria had trusted me enough to share her family's secrets. The way she'd looked at me when she said I reminded her of Miguel. "I'll trade," I said to the collector. His head tilted slightly, as if listening. "I'll give you the memory of my first day here. The day Maria hired me. It wasn't my most precious memory, but it was important, the beginning of everything that had led to this moment." The collector extended his hand. When I took it, cold flooded through me, and I felt something being pulled from my mind like a thread being drawn from fabric. For a moment, I couldn't remember how I'd ended up at the tavern. The memory was just gone. But the collector stepped back, apparently satisfied. He turned and walked through the kitchen wall as if it were made of mist. The basement was quiet again. "Is it over?" Carmen asked from the bottom of the stairs. Maria checked her watch. 1 hour until dawn. The worst part is past. We spent the remaining time taking occasional photographs, documenting the gradual retreat of the supernatural forces. The feeding tubes withdrew into their holes. The spirits of the dead faded back into whatever realm they normally inhabited. When the first rays of sunlight crept through the basement windows, Maria finally relaxed. "We made it," she said. But as we gathered our belongings and prepared to go upstairs, I realized something was wrong. I knew I worked at the tavern, knew Maria was my boss, but I couldn't remember how I'd gotten the job. That part of my life was just blank space. "The memory trade," Elena said quietly, noticing my confusion. "It's permanent." Maria put her hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Danny, but you saved us all." As we climbed the stairs into the brightening tavern, I wondered what other memories I might be willing to sacrifice to protect the people I cared about. Because somehow, I knew this wouldn't be the last harvest moon I'd face in this place. Outside, the holes Joe had described were gone, filled in as if they'd never existed. The highway looked normal again, just asphalt and painted lines stretching toward the horizon. But I kept the Polaroid camera. Something told me I was going to need it again. The next few days felt like walking through someone else's life. I knew my name was Danny Valdez, knew I worked at Maria's Roadhouse, knew the basic routines of prep work and serving customers. But there was a gap in my memory like a missing tooth. I could feel the empty space where something important used to be. Maria was patient with my confusion, filling in details when I asked. Apparently, I'd been working there for 8 months, had moved to the area after a construction job in Martha, was divorced with a daughter in Austin. But none of it felt real to me. It was like reading someone else's biography. "The memory trade always takes something central," she explained on the third day as we prepped vegetables for the lunch rush. "The collector doesn't want surface memories. He wants the ones that anchor you to a place or person. Will it come back?" "No, mijo. That's gone forever. But you'll build new anchors, new memories to define who you are." A familiar pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Joe Sandoval, arriving for his weekly chicken dinner. When he walked in, he looked relieved to see us both alive and working normally. "How are the cattle?" Maria asked as she started preparing his order. "Strange thing," Joe replied, settling at the bar. "Found them this morning, standing in a perfect circle in the south pasture. All 14 head, healthy as can be, but arranged like someone had positioned them there on purpose." He pulled out his phone and showed us a photo. The cattle were indeed standing in a perfect circle, all facing inward, as if they were protecting something in the center. "What's in the middle?" I asked. "Nothing. Just grass. But the grass is greener there than anywhere else on my property." Maria studied the photo carefully. Sometimes, when the underground thing feeds, it leaves gifts, patches of land that become more fertile. The old-timers used to call them blessing circles. Should I be worried? As long as your cattle stay healthy and the grass doesn't start growing too fast, you should be fine. But if anything changes, you call me. After Joe left, Maria led me to the back office and pulled out one of her filing cabinets. Inside were folders organized by year, each containing photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. "Since you can't remember how you got here, I want to show you why you stayed," she said, pulling out a folder marked 2024 current. The first item was a Polaroid photo dated 3 months ago. It showed me and Maria standing in front of the tavern, both smiling. On the back, someone had written, "Danny's first successful night shift. No supernatural incidents." "You took to this work faster than anyone I'd ever hired," Maria said. "Most people need months to accept that the supernatural is real. You adapted in weeks." She showed me more photos. Me learning to prepare the herb bundles Elena distributed. Me covering mirrors during a minor spiritual incident. Me helping a family of truckers who'd gotten lost and arrived at the tavern with something following their rig. "You have a natural ability to see through the veils," she continued. "Even before you learned the rules, you could sense when things weren't quite normal." The next photo made me pause. It showed me talking to a young woman outside the tavern. She was maybe 25, with long dark hair and a smile that seemed familiar. "Who is this?" Maria's expression grew serious. "That's Esperanza Morales, Joaquin's daughter." The name hit me like a physical blow. Joaquin, the ghost rider with the single headlight. His daughter is alive? Very much so. She's a nurse at the clinic in Presidio. Comes by once a month to leave flowers where her father crashed. I studied the photo, trying to remember the conversation. Something about it felt important, but the details were gone. "Danny, there's something else you need to know. Before the memory trade, you and Esperanza had been getting to know each other." The meaning of her words sank in slowly. "We were dating?" "Starting to." She understood about this place, about the supernatural elements. Her family has dealt with the aftermath of her father's death for 37 years. Maria closed the folder and put it back in the cabinet. "She's been asking about you since the harvest moon. Worried because you haven't called. I don't remember her phone number. It's in your cell phone." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts. There it was. Esperanza, Presidio Clinic. But looking at her name triggered no memories, no emotional recognition. Should I call her? That's up to you. But Danny, she cares about you. And before the memory trade, you cared about her too. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. We served lunch to a few local ranchers and a family of tourists heading to Big Bend. But I kept thinking about Esperanza, about the gap in my memory where apparently an entire relationship had been developing. Around 4 o'clock, a white Honda Accord pulled into the parking lot. Through the window, I watched a young woman with dark hair get out and walk toward the entrance. Even before she opened the door, I knew it was her. "Danny?" Esperanza's voice was cautious, hopeful. I looked at her face, searching for some flicker of recognition, some emotional response. She was beautiful, and there was something about her eyes that felt familiar. But it was like looking at a photograph of someone I'd never met. "Hi," I said awkwardly. Her smile faltered slightly. "Maria called and told me what happened, about the memory trade. She said we were getting to know each other." We were. She sat down at the counter, and I poured her coffee without thinking about it. Apparently, muscle memory worked even when conscious memory didn't. "Can you tell me about it? About us?" Esperanza was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her coffee. "We met 6 weeks ago when I came to leave flowers for my father. You were outside replacing a burned-out bulb in the porch light. You didn't know who I was, but you offered to help carry the flowers to the crash site." She continued talking, describing walks along the Rio Grande, dinners at the tavern after closing time, conversations about our families and our complicated relationships with this haunted stretch of highway. None of it triggered memories, but hearing her voice felt right, somehow. "I know this is hard," she said finally. "I'm not expecting you to remember feelings you don't have anymore, but I wanted you to know that what we had was real." Maria emerged from the kitchen, carrying a plate of fresh sopapillas. "You two should take a walk," she suggested. "The sunset's going to be beautiful tonight." We walked behind the tavern, following a dirt path that led toward a small rise overlooking the highway. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, painted in shades of gold and orange by the setting sun. "Does it hurt?" Esperanza asked. "Not remembering?" "It's like having a word on the tip of your tongue that never comes," I replied. "I know something's missing, but I can't define what it is." She pointed toward a spot on the highway about half a mile east. "That's where my father died. For 37 years, I've been coming here on the anniversary, leaving flowers and trying to understand why he keeps riding. Have you ever seen him? The headlight? Once. 3 years ago. He stopped right in front of me, and for just a moment, I could see his face in the light. He looked sad, like he wanted to tell me something but couldn't. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Despite not remembering our previous conversations, I found myself relaxing around her in a way I hadn't with anyone since the memory trade. "Esperanza," I said finally. "I don't remember what we had, but I'd like to try building something new. If you're willing." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The man I was falling for might be gone forever. Maybe, but I'm still here. Maybe a little different, but still me. She smiled, and for the first time since the harvest moon, something felt right in my life. We walked back to the tavern as full darkness settled over the desert. In the distance, a single headlight was approaching on the highway. Not Joaquin this time, just a normal motorcycle heading toward the border crossing. "There's something else you should know," Esperanza said as we reached the parking lot. "Before the memory trade, you told me you were thinking about staying here permanently, making this your home, even without remembering why I came here originally. You said the work felt important, like you were protecting something that needed protecting." Inside the tavern, Maria was closing up for the night. She looked at us both and smiled knowingly. "Esperanza, you're welcome to stay for dinner," she offered. I made extra enchiladas. As we sat in the booth where apparently Esperanza and I had shared many meals, I realized that maybe losing one memory had made room for new ones. Maybe the collector had taken something precious, but left behind the possibility of building something even better. Outside, the desert night was full of sounds. Coyotes calling to each other, the distant rumble of trucks on the highway, the whisper of wind through sagebrush. And somewhere in that darkness, spirits walked roads they could never leave, following rules older than memory itself. But inside Maria's Roadhouse, surrounded by warmth and the smell of good food, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. 2 weeks later, everything changed again. I was cleaning tables after the lunch rush when a black Suburban with government plates pulled into the parking lot. 3 men in dark suits got out, moving with the practiced coordination of people who worked dangerous jobs. They weren't border patrol. I'd served enough agents to recognize the difference. "Federal marshals," Maria said quietly, watching them through the window. "Haven't seen them here in 5 years." The lead marshal was a compact man with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. When they entered, he showed Maria his badge and introduced himself as Deputy Marshal Luis Herrera. "Ma'am, we're investigating some unusual disappearances along this stretch of highway. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Maria poured coffee for all 3 men without being asked. "Happy to help if I can." Marshal Herrera pulled out a tablet and showed her photos of 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, all between 20 and 35 years old. These individuals were last seen at various points along Highway 170 over the past 6 months. All of them sent final text messages or made phone calls from locations within 10 miles of here. I recognized one of the faces immediately. The young woman with blonde hair had been in the tavern about 3 weeks ago, asking for directions to the hot springs near Santa Elena Canyon. I'd given her a map and warned her about flash flood dangers. "This one came through here," I said, pointing to her photo. "Ashley something. She was heading to the river." "Ashley Chen," Marshal Herrera confirmed. "Her car was found abandoned near the canyon rim, but no sign of her, no footprints, no indication she ever left the vehicle." Maria studied the other photos carefully. "I recognize him too," she said, pointing to a man with a beard and hiking gear. "Marcus Rodriguez. He stopped for gas and food maybe 4 months ago. Paid with a credit card." The second marshal, a younger man with the build of a former military officer, leaned forward. Did either of them seem distressed? Were they meeting anyone? "No," Maria replied. "Normal travelers, far as I could tell." But I could see something in her expression, a tension that hadn't been there moments before. She knew more than she was saying. After 20 minutes of questions, the marshals finished their coffee and left, promising to return if they had more leads. Maria watched their Suburban disappear down the highway before turning to me. "We need to talk," she said. She led me to the basement, the same space where we'd hidden during the harvest moon. But this time, she went to a different section of the filing cabinets and pulled out a folder marked Rule 10, Emergency Protocols. "There's a rule I haven't taught you yet," she said. "The most important one." She opened a folder and showed me a collection of missing person reports dating back to the 1960s. Dozens of them, all following the same pattern. People disappearing without a trace within a 10-mile radius of the tavern. Rule number 10. Some who enter the shadow roads never return to the light. "Shadow roads?" Maria pointed to a hand-drawn map tucked inside the folder. It showed the local highway system, but with additional roads marked in red ink. Roads that curved and twisted in ways that defied geography. During certain phases of the moon, during specific weather conditions, or when someone is carrying too much emotional pain, they can slip from our highway onto something else. Roads that exist in the spaces between reality. I studied the map. The red roads formed a complex network that seemed to center on the tavern itself. "Are you saying people are driving into alternate dimensions?" "I'm saying there are paths that lead to places where the rules of our world don't apply. Most people can't see these paths, but some can, especially when they're desperate or searching for something they've lost." She pulled out another document, a journal entry written in Spanish, dated 1987. "This is from the night Joaquin Morales died. My mother was working here then. She saw him take the shadow road, trying to escape the border patrol. But the shadow roads don't lead to safety. They lead elsewhere. Is that why he keeps riding? Because he's trapped on the shadow roads? Partly. But it's more complicated than that." Maria sat down in one of the folding chairs we'd used during the harvest moon. "Danny, this tavern isn't just a restaurant. It's an anchor point, a place where the shadow roads connect to our reality. My family has been maintaining this connection for 70 years. The implications of what she was saying slowly sank in. The rules aren't just about surviving supernatural encounters. They're about maintaining some kind of barrier. Exactly. Every rule exists to keep the shadow roads from bleeding into our world completely. If this place ever closed permanently, if the rituals ever stopped, the barriers would collapse. What would happen then? The entire Rio Grande Valley would become a shadow road. Thousands of people would simply disappear. I thought about Ashley Chan and Marcus Rodriguez, about all the missing persons reports in the folder. But people are already disappearing. A few, yes. People who are vulnerable, who are carrying too much pain or guilt. The shadow roads call to them, and sometimes they answer. But it's a manageable loss compared to what would happen if the barriers failed completely. Maria stood up and walked to another cabinet, pulling out a leather-bound ledger that looked ancient. "This is the tavern's true purpose, Danny. Every family that's run this place has been guardians. keeping the shadow roads contained. When my grandmother married a Comanche man, she was joining two traditions: Spanish colonial protections and indigenous understanding of spirit paths. She opened the ledger and showed me pages of names, dates, and locations. Every person who's ever slipped onto the shadow roads, we document them, remember them, make sure they're not completely forgotten. Why are you telling me this now? Because those federal marshals aren't the only ones who've noticed the pattern. There are other government agencies, ones that deal with unusual phenomena. They've been asking questions, conducting satellite surveys of this area. She closed the ledger and looked at me seriously. If they decide this place is too dangerous, they'll shut us down, move the local families away, declare it a restricted zone. They don't understand that containment is better than elimination. What do you need me to do? I need you to decide if you're willing to become a true guardian of this place. It's not just about learning the rules anymore. It's about accepting responsibility for protecting thousands of people from something they'll never know exists. Before I could answer, the jukebox upstairs started playing. Not just one song, but cycling rapidly through tracks, the music distorting and speeding up like a record player spinning out of control. "That's not normal," I said. Maria grabbed the Polaroid camera from the shelf and we rushed upstairs. The dining room looked normal, but the jukebox was glowing with a light that seemed to come from inside the machine itself. I took a photo. When it developed, the image showed the jukebox surrounded by figures in old-fashioned clothing, men and women from different time periods, all reaching toward the machine as if trying to touch something. "The anchor point is destabilizing," Maria said grimly. "Something's wrong with the barriers." She ran to the front door and looked out at the highway. In the distance, heat shimmer was rising from the asphalt despite the cool November air. "There," she pointed. "Do you see it?" I squinted at the highway and saw what she meant. About a quarter-mile east, the road seemed to bend in a way that hurt to look at, curving off in a direction that shouldn't exist. "A shadow road is manifesting in broad daylight," Maria said. "That's never happened before." As we watched, a sedan drove down the highway toward the anomaly. The car was moving at normal speed, but as it approached the impossible curve, it began to fade, becoming transparent. "We have to stop them," I said, starting toward the door. "No." Maria grabbed my arm. "Rule number 11. Never follow the shadow roads, even to save the lost." "There's a rule 11? There is now." The sedan disappeared completely, just as if it had driven off the edge of the world. On the highway, there was no sign it had ever existed. No skid marks, no debris, no indication that anything unusual had happened, but I had seen it. We both had. "This is what I mean about being a guardian," Maria said quietly. "Sometimes you have to watch people drive into darkness and know there's nothing you can do to save them." The jukebox finally stopped its erratic playing, settling on a slow conjunto ballad that seemed almost mournful. The figures around it faded from view, but I kept taking photos, documenting everything. "The federal investigation is going to intensify," Maria continued. "More disappearances in broad daylight means more attention. We need to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" "For the possibility that we might have to choose between protecting our secret and protecting the people we care about." Outside, the heat shimmer was fading, and the highway looked normal again. But somewhere in the desert, a family was driving through landscapes that existed only in nightmares, following roads that led to places with no names. And in the basement of Maria's Roadhouse, a new entry would be added to the ledger. Another group of people who would be remembered only by the guardians who couldn't save them. "So," Maria said, studying my face carefully, Are you ready to accept this responsibility? Knowing that it means watching people die and never being able to explain why. I thought about Esperanza, about the life I was building here despite my lost memories. I thought about the harvest moon and the choice I'd made to trade my past for other people's lives. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Maria smiled sadly and pulled out a small silver key I'd never seen before. Then it's time you learned about the room upstairs. The room upstairs contains 47 mirrors. Maria showed me that night, using the silver key to unlock a door I'd walked past countless times without noticing. The space above the tavern's main dining room was larger than it appeared from outside, with mirrors of every size and age covering the walls, floor, and ceiling. Each one shows a different shadow road, she explained, her voice echoing strangely in the reflective chamber. This is how we monitor the network, how we know when the barriers are failing. Looking into the mirrors was like staring into windows of other worlds. One showed a highway that stretched upward into clouds. Another revealed a road made of what appeared to be flowing water. In a third, vehicles drove in reverse, while their headlights pointed backward. The people who disappear, I said, watching a lone pickup truck navigate a road that twisted through what looked like the inside of a tornado. Are they alive in there? Some are. Time works differently on the shadow roads. People who vanished decades ago might still be driving, searching for an exit that doesn't exist. She handed me a clipboard with a duty schedule. Twice a week, someone needs to come up here and check each mirror. Document any changes, photograph anything unusual. If you see more than 3 vehicles on any single road, call me immediately. That was my new reality. Days spent serving chicken fried steak and coffee to truckers and tourists. Nights spent monitoring supernatural highways through mirrors that reflected places that shouldn't exist. The federal investigation intensified over the following weeks. Marshal Herrera returned twice more, bringing specialists with equipment I didn't recognize. They took soil samples, measured electromagnetic fields, and asked increasingly specific questions about local folklore. They're getting close to the truth, Maria warned after their third visit. Government agencies have departments that deal with anomalous phenomena, if they classify this area as a threat. We both knew what that meant. Forced relocations, military barriers, an end to 70 years of careful guardianship. But then something unexpected happened. Esperanza received a call at the clinic. Marshal Herrera's partner, the younger man, had been found walking along Highway 170 in the early morning hours, confused and unable to remember the previous 3 days. His colleagues assumed heat exhaustion, but Esperanza suspected otherwise. When she examined him, she found something that confirmed our fears. Sand in his shoes that didn't match any geological formations in Texas. Sand that shimmered with colors that had no names. He drove onto a shadow road, she told us that evening, but somehow found his way back. Maria examined the sand sample under magnification. This is from the mirror road, the one that reflects our world back to itself. It's the closest shadow road to our reality, and the only one with an exit. What does this mean for the investigation? It means they'll be more careful. They've lost a man to something they don't understand. Government agencies don't like unexplained phenomena, but they like losing personnel even less. The federal visit stopped after that. Marshal Herrera left his card with instructions to call if we noticed anything unusual, but his tone suggested he'd rather we didn't. Esperanza and I settled into a routine that felt like rebuilding rather than starting over. She understood the weight of guardian duties, having grown up with stories of her father's entrapment on the shadow roads. We spent evenings in the mirror room, documenting the endless traffic of the lost. "Do you ever regret staying?" she asked one night, as we watched a convoy of vehicles from the 1950s navigate a road that led through what appeared to be the interior of a massive cave. "Which part?" I replied, losing my memories to the collector or accepting responsibility for something I can't fully understand. Either. Both. I thought about the question seriously. Danny Valdez from 8 months ago, the man I couldn't remember being, had come here by accident, running from a failed marriage, an uncertain future. But the person I was now had chosen this place, chosen this responsibility. "No regrets," I said finally. "This work matters. These people need protecting, even if they never know it." Outside, a truck rumbled past on the real highway, its driver probably thinking about getting home to family, unaware that parallel to his route, dozens of other roads carried the lost through landscapes of perpetual twilight. In the mirror room above Maria's Roadhouse, we kept watch over travelers who would never find their way home, guardians of mysteries that couldn't be solved, only contained. And somewhere in the desert night, Joaquin Morales continued his endless ride, a single headlight cutting through darkness on roads that existed between the spaces of reality itself.